Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific prototype race car review, once again from Gran Turismo 6, where we are revisiting Spirit of Le Mans, the very first review series on the channel, with some HD remakes, if you will, and also a slightly different style of review to what I used to do back then, giving the cars scores and points in different things. This is more of an overarching review, and of course the car in question is a very popular one, a fan favourite, and for good reasons, the Peugeot 905, to the point where now in Gran Turismo Sport you will often see people painting the 908 with this livery to make it look like the 905, and it looks very good with that livery. It's a very simple, clean, recognisable colour scheme which makes the car stand out, but it's not just that, because something that you might not have noticed about the Peugeot is it's one of the very few prototypes in not just Gran Turismo, but funnily enough Forza as well, where it's almost alone in terms of where it falls in the history of prototype racing. Because if you look at something like the 80s Group C cars, or the late 90s GT1s, or even the 2000s LMPs, they all have a number of direct rivals and peers. The difference with the Peugeot is it doesn't. And you're probably thinking, well, surely the Mazda 787B is a fantastic rival. It's so similar in so many ways. They're both screamers, they're both very lightweight, and only 1 year separates the two cars. Those are all true. However, not really, because in 92 and 93, the rulebook was different to 91. And of course, Mazda won in the 787B in 1991, and then this Peugeot won both the 1992 and 93 Le Mans 24-hour races. But the reason why this car stands out so much is because you never see any of its rivals in any of these Gran Turismo or Forza games, and although you might see some of them in smaller titles that I'm not thinking of, you don't tend to see the V10 era of prototypes that much. And what I mean by that is that this particular car and all of its rivals in those years were very heavily inspired by Formula One tech. In fact, arguably more so than Le Mans has ever been before or since. They had V10 engines, really high RPM, much more of a focus on huge wings and maximum downforce and cornering ability, less emphasis on top speed, and they were ultra lightweight. In fact, the early 90s of Le Mans gave us some of the lightest prototypes we've ever seen. And this one really does go to show that, because this car weighs a frankly ridiculous 750 kilos. That makes virtually all of the other prototypes look heavy. The closest thing is the Mazda, and the Mazda still weighs 80 kilos more at 830. So compared to like a modern prototype where you're looking at 900 kilos, 920 kilos for like an Audi R10, it's way lighter, almost a full 200 kilos lighter in some cases, which for a prototype is a colossal difference. And the result of that is that 3.5 litre V10 engine, which easily revs up into 5 figures, doesn't need to be the most powerful and especially not the torquiest thing around, because it's carrying such a tiny amount of weight, very high revving engine that loves to be pushed hard. And although that seems like a very bad idea for an endurance race, it certainly worked here because the car won twice, as I said. Now, as far as pricing in the game goes, it's fairly expensive, but it's not in the absolute upper tier of prototypes. It's 1.97 million, so still just under 2, so there are a couple that are more expensive. But in terms of spec, fully tuned, of course, you're looking at 1,036 horsepower, so definitely not lacking, but also nowhere near the most powerful prototype in the game, that's for sure. The torque is actually among one of the lowest. It's actually not that much better than the Zytek. It's 519 pound-feet, but, and this is the really cool part about the car, because it only weighs 750 kilos, you're looking at an insane 1,381 horsepower per tonne, which is bonkers. That's actually beyond the power-to-weight ratio of most superbikes. A Yamaha R1, for instance, which I often compare these cars to for reference, has 1 horsepower per kilo, which is exactly 1,000 horsepower per tonne. This is 1,381. Way more. That's pretty impressive, considering how much heavier the car is compared to a motorbike. Now, the performance points are 715, so it's pretty high, but once again, not breaking the bank. There are plenty of other prototypes that are similar and some that are even higher. But of course, the greatest thing about the Peugeot 905 is the cornering. it's almost untouchable. In Forza, for instance, like Forza 4 back in the day, this and the Mazda 787B were hands down the two most dominant grip prototypes in the game, especially in the R1 category. And against cars in Gran Turismo 6, it still packs a hefty punch. Now, one of the things that has made this car significantly better than it used to be, because for those who don't know, this was first introduced in Gran Turismo 4, and I instantly fell in love with it. I'd never heard of the car before, but it had really laggy gear changes. In fact, if you go back and play Gran Turismo 4 and drive this car now, it feels horrendously bad. It takes so long to change gear. In this game, and I believe in Gran Turismo 5 as well, if memory serves, and certainly, once again in Forza this was never a problem, the gear changes are way better. It gets through the gears faster, because in Gran Turismo 4 it almost completely neutered what the car was capable of, whereas in GT6 it really is a force to be reckoned with. And although I said it's not a top speed car and a top end power car, don't be fooled, it is not slow. I did a top speed tune for this way back, and it can easily exceed supercar numbers more often than not. So of course, when you combine that with ultra low weight, an insane amount of downforce, and grip like you could not believe, well, of course it's going to be one of the most competitive things out there. To the point where it's not just competitive as a prototype and for its age, it can actually beat a lot of newer machines, even cars that are 10, 15 years newer, sometimes even with more power. So it's fantastic. I personally believe that this car is a prime candidate for the full HD premium update treatment with the detailed interior, better graphics. How cool would it be to finally be able to paint the car with their own liveries? Not necessarily in GT Sport, although of course that would be nice. Potentially in Gran Turismo 7, because this is one of those prototypes that, although the crowd of players who are vocal about it coming back aren't necessarily quite as large as the group asking for stuff like the Minolta, or maybe the Audi R8, like the early 2000s, possibly the Bentley Speed 8, those tend to be the one that people ask for the most. This one certainly has its fans, plenty of them, but it tends to be the kind of car that speaks to you more with what it's capable of, rather than because of how good looking it is or anything like that. Some cars have that appeal as well, like the Toyota GT1. This one is a pure weapon. Absolute monster around the track. Surprisingly good in a straight line, screamer of an engine, performs, sounds, looks, handles like nothing else in the game. So if you do get the chance to try it out, definitely worth a look. And I for one do really hope that Polyphony brings this car back. It's an icon for a reason. We still have the Peugeot 908 in the game and it's brilliant, but this one offers a totally different prototype experience to what the Peugeot 908 does. In fact, it's almost the opposite in every way. That one's this ultra low revving, high torque diesel. This one's an ultra lightweight, low torque, high revving petrol V10. So they are polar opposites, but both brilliant in their own way. But that's it overall for this review. Of course, stick around on the channel for more, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.